This is a short presentation from members of Compass Oxfordshire, and we're going to outline some of our ideas on anti-reform campaigning. So, to prevent reform wins in May, we as campaigners have to reach persuadable reform voters. This isn't a comfortable prospect, but reforms polling remains very strong, press scrutiny is poor, left-wing parties aren't cooperating, and reform is receiving absurd amounts of funding. So we do have a vital role in curbing reform support. Of the 5 voter types used in Hope Not Hate's research, our focus is on those groups which together represent over 50% of reform supporters, who stand out as persuadable. They are squeezed stewards, reluctant reformers, and contrarian youth. All of these share a deep cynicism about establishment politics and a desire for radical change. There's one other significant demographic which we're also included, which is undecided voters. We think a non-partisan approach will be most successful in deterring people from voting reform. If they switch to a progressive party, that's a bonus, but it's not the primary aim. So we're going to go on to problems for campaigning. The first is automatic barriers created by assumptions about progressive campaigners, which act as an immediate block to successful communication. We are prejudged as soft, middle-class elites detached from the coalface of life, a dodgy bunch of tax-hiking tree huggers who favour crackpot ideas fed us by climate science quacks and the deeply gender confused, whilst welcoming in invading alien cultures and ignoring the reforms supporters' most cherished values: family, community, nation, and day-to-day survival. The important thing is that they perceive us, frankly, like we perceive them, as ill-informed, dangerously manipulated by propaganda, and as a threat. This is a poor starting point, we feel, for campaigning. There are some grains of truth as well in how we're perceived. Studies suggest that the progressive left is seen as exceptionally intolerant of opposing views and presumptuous about the self-evident correctness of our own. For example, progressives grossly underestimated voter support for letting in more refugees and were far more inclined to view Leave voters negatively than backbone conservatives. To quote Nick Lowell's, the left tend to be perceived as judgmental and dogmatic. The third issue is polarization, which has driven the two blocs into fundamentally different and opposing universes, fed by relentless rage baiting from the press and social media. But we have to work in this arena. And finally, indiscriminate use of campaign content. There is, of course, a substantial amount of anti-reform literature, but we feel that more thought needs to go into tailoring it. Anti-hate cross-ethnic community strengthening content like this may be effective for certain demographics, but not others. Imagery like this poster could backfire badly if stuck on the walls of Epping or Brumby, North Lincolnshire. We also need to devise better strategies for communicating with the other bloc, using our understanding of them and how they perceive us to adapt and modify our messaging. So Compass Oxfordshire has been looking at some of these issues and how to construct more persuasive campaigning content. It's very much work in progress for us, but with the problems just outlined in mind, we're going to briefly outline some themes, principles and tactics that we've created so far. I'm now going to hand over to Bernadette to talk about these themes.
Thanks, Claire. So we've looked at some themes for challenging reformers or reform-curious voters. And based on Steve Akert's recent research, he's someone who researches on persuasion tactics, we'd suggest avoiding contentious subjects like net zero, Brexit, PR, St George and Union Jack flags, DEI and trans issues, These topics are vitally important, but to reformers, they presuppose that we're coming from the ideological position that Claire has just described, and this immediately undermines the credibility of our interactions. But two standout useful themes Akehurst identifies, however, are one, corporate interests. There is common ground to be found on the subjects like Bitcoin, fossil fuel, industry alignment, dodgy donors, and Farage's expense investigation and second jobs, because most people would regard those things as contentious or, if not bad. And the second, and perhaps at the moment more important, room for persuasion is Farage's Trump alignment. Farage has expressed support for many of Trump's policies, including a desire to import ICE programs and Project 25. And more recently, he's expressed support for the Iran war when it first broke out, although he now denies it, of course. And we've added a few more, untested in research, but we feel they're salient points that we could use to persuade people. They include workers, renters, and women's rights, the Reform Party policy on minimum wage, worker benefits, employer protection, and evictions, etc., are unlikely to be known or to be unpopular even with potential reform voters. Quite often, they don't know what reforms policies are on these, but when told about them, they are likely to not regard them as very helpful for themselves. And secondly, and this is an important one, the NHS. There are issues with insurance-based systems endorsed by reform, which even the reform curious might have trouble reconciling themselves to. Having mentioned some approaches that